Welcome to the Sober by Design podcast, where we explore the many pathways to recovery and a better life through conversations with a wide array of guests. Whether you're sober curious, in recovery, or simply looking to improve your mental health and well-being, this podcast will have something for you. Each week, we sit down with inspiring guests from all walks of life who share their personal stories of struggle and triumph, offering valuable insights and practical advice on how to design a life worth living. From addiction and mental health to spirituality and creativity, we cover a wide range of topics that are relevant to anyone seeking to live a more fulfilling and authentic life. So join us on this journey of discovery, growth, and transformation, and start designing a new life. All right, everybody, welcome to the Sober by Design podcast. Today we have a guest, Jonathan Niziol. Jonathan's a model and trainer, mental health and recovery advocate, a real estate agent slash developer, and
investor.
Investor, and an overall cool guy. And I'm really happy to have him on the show. He has a interesting background and a story, and just everything he's doing now, I think, is really applicable to what we talk about on this podcast. So, Jonathan, thanks for taking the time today.
Thanks for having me, Corey, and thanks for slipping in that cool guy thing I asked you to. To those listening, I just said as a joke in the beginning, and he slipped it in. So he's a pretty cool guy in my books as well.
So, Jonathan,
so thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we normally start this out by just talking a little bit about your background, and really like your background, like where you grew up, how you grew up. I think it is important to everybody's story. So if you can just give us a history of like early life for you. What was it like through your eyes, like your version of the story?
Sure. So I'm originally from Canada, born and raised. I'm coming to you from Texas right now, but about 5 years. But yeah, born and raised in Canada. I grew up on a 500-acre cattle farm, and that was a big part of my childhood, a big part of my life growing up. I learned so many lessons on the farm that have helped me into adulthood, and to help the lessons instilled in me on the farm have helped me navigate the addiction and the alcoholism and all kinds of problems. But yeah, early life was very family oriented. I've always been a big athlete. Athletics has always been part of my life. Hockey player. Being from Canada, I'm wearing my Toronto Maple Leafs t-shirt right now because they're in the playoffs, but they're not doing very well. But we don't talk about that. Also a lacrosse player. I ended up becoming a professional lacrosse player, but I started like I said, it's growing up on a farm when you're young. I was the only boy as well, so it was my duty, and I didn't really have a choice. My dad and I had to run it, and it would be. I remember it being summertime, and my friends would be going to their cottage or whatever. I'm 11, 12 years old, and it's summertime, and it's 90 degrees, and we had to do hay for 3 days straight because that's what you had to do, and it was wonderful in its own way. As a child, maybe I would have wanted to be jumping off a dock somewhere, but in retrospect, it's Thanksgiving break and we have to clean the barn. It's like, okay, well, we're going to clean the barn for, that's what we have to do. So lessons like that really instilled in me a sense of doing what you need to do and not just what you want to do, because we had livestock that their lives, they relied on us. It didn't matter if we didn't feel like getting out of bed because it's minus 40 and it's Canadian winter. Like, we got to go put hay out, and my dad would be away on business. He's also an architectural designer, so he owned two businesses. So when he was away traveling, it was up to me as a 9, 10, 11-year-old child and then on up to go do the chores, and I love it. I look back so fondly on it. Our cattle were purebred, called Charolais cattle, so they're the all white cattle. They're beef cattle, but we processing. They were more, like I said, they're show cattle. They're more like pets. We would take them around the country and go to cattle shows and stuff like that. So it was a very wonderful way to grow up. My parents were always very supportive of all my athletic endeavors, and they understood the fact that I just didn't love school as much, but they, did their best to try and motivate it and stuff like that. But yeah, that's a bit about how I grew up. When I turned 15 or 16, I guess, I went to private school just outside of Philadelphia, which was kind of a good transitional time for me. My parents were going through a divorce at the time, and my sister was already out of the house. Good time for me to kind of branch out on my own. And it was a very small boarding school outside of Philadelphia, but it was enough that I could start to gain some independence. And I went there for my senior year, and I hadn't played lacrosse since I was probably 13, but I decided to play again because they had a team, and ended up doing pretty well, and it was all state Pennsylvania for the lacrosse scholarship. But like I said, it was a really good way for me to kind of get a little bit of independence and to, leave the nest, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But with a very, not sheltered, but a very structured, safe kind of way. And then, I got to college and I just drank like crazy and did all that kind of stuff because I was just free. And yeah, so that gets us up to about to college. So
all right. Let's pause there for a second because I got a couple questions. So
Sure.
One is 500 acres is a big piece of land for people who don't know acreage. I have 3-ish acres that I live on, and it's big, right? There's like a good portion that I never even go on.
Yeah.
So 500 acres to me is, I have a 200-acre farm behind me that I can see through my land, and that looks huge, right? So like I can visualize your land. So you're definitely growing up on a very rural area. How much cattle did you have? Was it like a giant amount or was it manageable?
No, we manageable. Probably 50 head at the most, 50 head of cattle, because like I said, just processing like meat through there. We were really, I didn't even know the term grass fed or organic or stuff. Like we just put our cattle in the pasture. Cows eat grass.
Right.
Like that's the obvious for us. Like we're like, oh yeah, cows eat grass. Like we wouldn't give them hormones because why would you give cattle hormones? They just need grass and water. Like
right.
So it was a manageable 50 head, like I said, but we do hay and we had some other crops and stuff that we would pull off of the land as well.
It's a lot.
Yeah,
I mean, I see what it takes because I live in a pretty rural area for New Jersey, at least. And it's, it's definitely a lot of work. And for people who have not seen it, it's, the scale of what you were dealing with was big at that age. And so it was your parents at that point. You had one sister?
Yep.
Okay. And that was it? In house?
Technically, I grew up the youngest of 4, but it's kind of a weird thing. Like since my mom passed away and stuff, so it's basically just my dad and I now. So yeah, that's a whole thing that will.
I gotcha.
But yeah, at the time, I had a sister who was. I still have a sister somewhere out there, but she is 3 years older than me. But yeah, I was the boy of the farm. I was, my dad's little buddy. I mean, we'd have projects all the time, and he was architecture designer too, so we didn't just have like a rundown farm. We everything had to be, and everything was done the right way, and it was fantastic. We had some of my fondest memories are we'd be building fences, and we would just there'd be a wire on a spool, and it would have to go, I don't know, a mile down, and I'd just and I'd start walking.
Yeah,
I'd just walk down there myself, just walking through the field. And then I'd walk all the way back, and it was wonderful.
Yeah.
It was just, it was such a great way to grow. And I could just go and get lost in the fields and the forest with my dogs for 6 hours with my pellet gun and never hit anything. I thought I was this great white hunter, and I, not so much, but I'd come back for dinner and my parents just wouldn't worry about me. And yeah, it was a fantastic way to grow up.
Good, good. And then you said at 15 you went to Philly.
Yep.
Kind of I mean, just a random place to go. If you're from Canada, it's like you just end up in Philly, which isn't too far from where I live, probably 3 hours. What was that? Like, were you searching for a private school, or did it come out of some need, or what was happening? Because you mentioned the divorce and things like that. So what kind of
Yeah. So
preempted
it's
that?
kind of, that's good. It's good you picked up on that. You should be a podcaster. You're good at this. Um, so I was going private school in Canada, and I had been going to it from grade 7 to 11, and my sister had left the house to go to college and stuff like that. And I was always, I was just kind of, it was a very prestigious private school there, and I was just doing okay. I was always doing great at sports, but work-wise, school-wise, I was always just kind of getting by. And it was a good time for me, like I said, I was going to go live in the dorms at that school anyway, just because I wanted, like, my friends lived in the dorms and I was a day student and I'd go back. And then they found an all-boys school that, just kind of dealt with, like, I'd been tested for ADD and didn't have it, ADHD didn't have it. I just like sports. Like,
Yeah.
that's what the doctor told my parents. Like, he just loves sports. Like, he just wants to go chase tennis balls around when he's like, if he does the work, he's really good at it. But so yeah, they found that school, and that was kind of it was kind of in conjunction with, it was time for me to move on from that school, and then this was a good fit. So it is very random because I didn't know anything about Philadelphia or Pennsylvania or anything about that area, but everything happens for a reason, and I'm glad that I did, because it was wonderful.
Yeah. And that experience led you to college through a lacrosse scholarship, which I guess then sets off this next stage of life for you. So is college in the States as well?
Yeah, in the Philadelphia area.
Okay.
Same thing, just outside of Philly, like 20 minutes outside of Philly.
Yep.
I stayed local to that area. Had a great time. Got to college. I never really drank much in high school, because I lived on a farm. Like, if I I'm not going to go sit in the field and drink by myself.
Yeah.
My dad, very strict and that kind of, but in a good way. I would just get murdered. Like, so I didn't really get that much of that out of my system. So when I got to college, I really went, like, all out. And I found, like, I have an addictive personality. It's a genetic thing for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I've approached sports and those things in my life. And if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it, like, all out. And I was drinking too much in college. Because I got to college and it's like, first of all, you're on the lacrosse team. People think that's pretty cool. I'm like, okay. And I'm in a co-ed dorm and I'm like, pinch me, like, I must be dreaming.
Yeah.
And then people aren't taking attendance at class because nobody's telling you to get up and go to class. And there's a party every night. It's like, what? Like, this is awesome. So I had tendencies, and I was noticing tendencies already to that I could get out of hand with drinking and smoking weed and stuff like that. But after college, I pulled back. I noticed I'd go like 6 months without drinking, just because I was like, I'm going to take a break. My siblings would be like having a glass of wine and stuff, and like, you want something? I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm cool. I just don't feel like it. And it wasn't for any specific reason. It's just, I don't know why I did. Actually, now looking back, it wasn't until the day of my 21st birthday, and this is where my life takes a drastic change. Is the day before my 21st birthday, my mom passed away very suddenly and very unexpectedly.
Okay.
And she and I were extremely close. She was not good at hiding the fact that I was her favorite child. I was her everything. She was my best friend, my biggest supporter. My dad and I were very close still, but she and I had a very special relationship. And that just completely rocked my world, as you can imagine. It's that time in your life where you're going adolescence and you're kind of starting to tiptoe into adulthood, and how that changes your relationship with your parents. So I was just starting to know that, and then that was taken away. And I soon after that I started to deal with mental health issues, and that was 20 years ago. So it wasn't really talked about as much. I had never heard the word depression or anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
and thankfully, because of the way that I grew up and I'd not having dealt with those things, so I just thought I was going crazy. I just thought I was like, I didn't know that there were names for these. I just thought that nobody's felt this way before. I'm going crazy. I'm never going to make it through this. But I was diagnosed with having clinical depression, severe anxiety, panic disorder, and then some self harm as well. And I started to take medication for it, which helped. But what really helped, or so I thought, was self medicating. And that's when the drinking got crazy. And started out, just I ended up becoming a lacrosse player, and started out just partying with the boys, having whatever, just getting through together the guys and the girls. And it was, I always talk about with people the want as opposed to need, and it was like, hey, do you want to get together and have a few beers? And it was like, oh, I need to sit home and get drunk by myself.
Right.
Because I've got too many things going on in my head and I can't escape. So pretty quickly I became like a non-alcoholic. And I say not because I wasn't keeping together at work, my relationships, my financial, my health, everything was just falling apart. And I was skipping work to start drinking first thing in the morning. Yeah, it was a very dark time for me. Very dark.
So at 21, your mom passes away very unexpectedly, and I'm guessing pretty young, as
Yep.
well, right? So that's definitely like earth shattering. I get it, and I can, understand how that would sort of destabilize the situation. At the same time, you're going into this professional lacrosse world, right? Like, are they happening kind of at the same time, right? So you're like,
The pro lacrosse came a little bit later. I was just actually, it was interesting because I had just moved out 11 days before my mom passed away.
okay,
I was ready. I was going to get my first big boy job. I was going to go sell cars in this city that was about 3 hours away from the farm. It was where my sister lived actually, and that's when I wanted to move there. I'm like, okay, now I'm out of college, finished college.
mm-hmm.
I left after 2 years because my drinking was getting a little bit out of hand, and my mom needed me to be at home. That was that was just the right thing to do. But I was heading out, and it was time to like I said, be a big boy and be an adult and go out and
Mm-hmm.
get an adult job. And it was 11 days before, and she passed away at home, and that was always a big thing that haunted me for a long time. Was like I should have been there, and I, but I wasn't, and I know that that's not how it works. And
Right.
it took a lot of years. But the professional lacrosse started 23 to 26.
Okay.
Played 23 to 26.
Okay. And I would imagine, yeah, that is a world where partying could be, you know,
Oh yeah.
a big part of it. And you were prescribed medication for the depression and anxiety?
Yep.
So you were taking the
Yep.
medication and then drinking on top of it, which
Yep.
a lot of people do. I've done it. I get it. But it definitely sort of takes away the usefulness of the actual medication, and just kind of puts you in this
Yeah.
awful tailspin. Don't recommend it.
No, definitely do not. Don't recommend it.
Yeah.
Don't. But that's the thing. There was so little knowledge about it back then too, right? Like it wasn't as available. The knowledge and the or the access to the information about these kinds of things. Not to mention, I mean, I was going to drink. Like I didn't. Even if you told me that wasn't, I
Yeah.
was still going to self medicate.
Yeah. I mean, now I think people can kind of access, to your point, a lot more information. They get some sort of education just through social media, specifically if they are sort of checking out, symptoms around depression or anxiety, or they're on any of the SSRIs or anything like that. They're probably doing some amount of online research, which can lead you down a rabbit hole, but will give you sort of the high level, don't do this, don't do that, idea. So it's definitely gotten better. Um,
It's also like you go on WebMD now for a hangnail in your toe and it says you're going to die.
I know.
So
Yeah,
there's
again, it's like,
that aspect of everybody, self-diagnosing and like, but it is good. Like you said, it is good there's a lot of information out there, but it's important to be like, it's important to work with a medical professional
yeah.
and to be careful of the information you're taking in.
Yeah, and it is always good to talk to the doctor and be, I say this about therapy, like with therapists, it's you can go to your therapist all the time, and if you don't go there and tell the truth about what's going on and how things are actually going, and then leave there and put into action what they tell you, you're kind of wasting your time. It's like going to the gym and like watching
Mhm.
somebody on a treadmill, right? You can say you went to the
Yeah.
gym, but you didn't do anything. You just sat
Yeah.
there, right? So like when I go to my doctor, I am very honest about what's going on health wise. I listen and I try to take those actions home and put them into place. Not always 100%, but if you're doing 90, you're pretty good.
Yeah.
So obviously you were drinking, your drinking picks up, you're playing lacrosse. What starts to transpire that puts you down a path towards this recovery mindset?
So the true recovery didn't happen for about 15 years, but the end of the thing was when I was 25.
Okay.
And that was when I got a very severe case of acute pancreatitis. And it was from drinking. I was in the hospital for just under a month. I had to have 5 blood transfusions. I lost about 60 pounds in total, 40 pounds in the first 2 weeks. And I almost died twice while I was in there. And that was a very, I mean, no pun intended, but it was a very sobering thing. It was terrifying to be in there because you're 25 years old. You think I'm invincible.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing all this kind of stuff, but I still thought I had it all figured out. I was like, whatever, dude. Like I'm 25, nothing can stop me. And you're laying there and you're faced with your own mortality,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, oh wow, like this is real deal. Like I barely made needed it to be that severe because it's a constant thing in my life, and I'm sure a lot of people are like this, but I know for myself, I have to touch the stove to learn that it's hot. It has to be that severe for me to get it. So after going through that, I came out of the hospital never wanting to touch another sip of alcohol, which I have not done in 16 plus years, and also with a much better appreciation for my body because I realized how incredible these machines are. These we have are, if we're born healthy and we're lucky enough, it's just what it does effortlessly. Like putting alcohol in fast food, like my pretty much my diet, it should be like putting diesel in a gasoline engine. Like it
Yeah.
should just be like nope. But somehow I was surviving on Big Macs and Coors Light. Like, but I wanted to learn. I got out of that. Hey, I put some better stuff in my body. It will treat me better back, and it really does. So I really got excited, and I always say I put a lot of my drinking energy into fitness and health and learning about the body, and that ignited my passion for fitness, and then that led to the personal training. And the lacrosse career ended about a year after I got out of the hospital. I had a career-ending knee injury. Was playing the best lacrosse of my life, but I was 26, and you can't make a living at it. Just didn't pay enough at the time. So going to work with a black eye and stitches and stuff like that just wasn't, so cute anymore. And
Yeah.
yeah, so that's why I decided to start modeling and look into doing some modeling. And yeah, that's how
And
portion of it.
how did the modeling thing come about?
So my mom had been a model actually in the late 70s, early 80s. And she was always very like interested in the model, like the fashion scene and stuff like that. Even though we were out in the farm, she'd still get Vogue, and my sister would get 17 magazine and all that kind of stuff. And she talked to me about it and stuff, and I was like, oh yeah, that's cool, whatever. But then once I got back into shape and I ended stopped playing lacrosse, I thought, maybe I'll go check it out for myself and kind of see what it's about, and found out that better agencies in Toronto are, and went went for some open castings and got my first, and I'm still with my same agency up there. I've been all over the world with a whole bunch of different agencies, but my agency's in Toronto. Been with them for 15 years, and an agency in Dallas, but I've been to Miami, New York, London, all that kind of stuff. So it really started with my curiosity because of my modeling, and just kind of thinking like, hey, when one door closes, this lacrosse thing's over.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll try that.
Okay. So you're drawn to the fitness at that point. You're obviously, the drinking's gone away. You have a new career now, like in the modeling world, and you're doing the personal training on the side. You said to me before, like the drinking stopped, but recovery didn't start. Like what was that differential for you there? Like what's the difference in your life that happened, but also just, I guess, sort of defining it for the listeners is, I think, a cool thing.
You mean like what I was doing still, like that was not keeping me from recovery?
Yeah.
So at first it was fitness, and I was like, okay, I'm going to get in shape. And I mean, if you're going to the gym, you can't go to the gym too. It's good for you. But that became a distraction, and it's all distractions. I've spent half my life distracting myself from my feelings without knowing that I was distracting myself. And then sometimes it was very obviously distracting myself. The alcohol was, self-medicating distraction. But then I thought, oh, it's healthy. You're going to the gym. It doesn't matter. Okay, well, maybe I'll go for like 6 hours today. And, maybe I've never taken anything illegal and put anything illegal in my body or whatever. But, if I was sore, I'd take an Advil and just go to the gym. And if I didn't have energy, I would take a bunch of caffeine and go to the gym.
Yeah.
There was that obsessive, still that addictive personality, or that addictive quality. One of the first podcasts I did was called the Again Again podcast. This guy, Gary, he said that we do things alcoholically, like with that same mindset.
Sure.
And I thought that really resonated with me, because that didn't leave me. It very much stayed with me. So first it was the gym, and then I was traveling for modeling. I went to South Africa and had a wonderful 6 months there. I was there for modeling, and the people were incredible. The place was incredible. But I started to plant the seed of body dysmorphia, because I looked at myself and compared myself to the other models, and I'd seen these models on the covers of all the big magazines and stuff like that. And oh man, these guys are massive. They're ripped, So I'm still working out like a professional athlete. I'm naturally, I build and carry muscle. It's a genetic, whatever. It's a thing. So I'm still working out like a professional. Get to South Africa, and I'm quite as these guys. Yeah. Like I'm benching like 120-pound dumbbells, and these guys are lifting like 60s, and I'm like, oh, they're not, they're just really ripped. So I started to put that whole kind of like, maybe I should try and be more like so and so, as opposed to being like myself. And I got, if they booked this and this job, and I got this and this job, well, why didn't I get the other jobs that they got? Like that kind of. So I had that like already starting, and my next stop was Miami, my first major US market. And I was like, man, this is the big time now. Like getting a big US agency, big market, awesome. So I went to Miami, and I was there for like 2 days. And the second day, my agency called. They had a casting for me to go to. And I'm like, awesome, great, work started already. And it was actually, it's what's called a go see. So it's like when you're new in town, or if you have to do pictures or something like that, and a designer or a client asks you specifically to try some clothes on, see your look in person or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they said that this go see was at this designer's house. It's like, that's kind of weird. It was at night, like 8:30 at night, and I'm like, okay, that's kind of weird, but whatever. Um, and he's a swimwear underwear designer, which wasn't weird because I have and do shoot a lot of body stuff. But he also said that he's a bit of a creep, but if he likes you, he'll book you a bunch. I'm like, okay. Anyway, long story short, so I ended up going there, and I was sexually assaulted by this guy while I was trying on his underwear and stuff like that. Like I, I got, yeah, I was put in a situation where he started to sexually assault me, and I've been in a lot of physical altercations in my life.
Yeah.
People who know me, like, whether it was lacrosse or it was bar fights or it was whatever, I was always. So my first thought was, oh, I'm going to beat this person to death.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought, okay, well, I can't do that because I'll go to jail for the rest of my life. I came to my senses and I just got out of there. But I never told anybody because this is 2010. This is before the Me Too movement. And this is also a time where you'd go to different markets and somebody was deemed a troublemaker, in quotes, for whatever reason. They would get blacklisted. Some people would be out partying and doing drugs all night. They were a troublemaker. Some people would, have a situation like this and cause a stir, and it would get from one designer to a photographer, and they would get kind of blacklisted. But not to mention, I was ashamed, mad, confused. I mean, every emotion you could imagine, I was thinking that. And 2 weeks after that happened, when I let the body dysmorphia totally take your battle with eating disorder. And I always say that I was like a functioning bulimic because I'd wake up, I would eat my meals and everything would be fine. But it wasn't until I got home or I was alone with my thoughts and my feelings that I was like, oh, I'm going to go get like $100 worth of drug food and just like eat it all. And, that'll just and then regret it and then just break it up and did that for a while. So yeah, that was because it took me a long time to realize and to get to the point where I realized that this is just in life in general, just a big thing in our society nowadays is be the best version of yourself because there's only one of you out there. And, my trying to emulate one of my roommates or whomever, there already is one of them. Like there's one Jonathan Niziol, and I got to be the best version of myself. And for me, the best version of myself is, and especially with modeling, because they have, you have to be certain sizes and you have to be a certain whatever stuff. And I got to the point where I was like, look, I'm not trying to be a bodybuilder or anything like that, but I naturally carry a bit more muscle. I'm going to be a bit bigger than these standard sizes. And I'm going to be at a comfortable weight and whatever, and that's just, and I started to get more ever since, but it was a very, very hard lesson to learn. And especially as an adult, I can't imagine people who start this stuff at like 16, like people were sending their kids to Miami and New York at 16.
Right.
And I'm 26, 27, 28 years old learning this stuff. So.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there too that we just talked about. And there was a couple of things that I just wanted to make sure that I touched on. So one was this idea of, you stopped drinking, but you went right into fitness and you kind of hit it hard. And it became sort of the substitute. And, I always think that, and, one of the other podcasts you were on, the gentleman said, we do everything alcoholically. And it's this idea that we can kind of control what we're feeling inside with an outside source, right? Like it could be exercise, it could be alcohol, it could be food, it could be social media. We don't feel like proper in the world. So we're trying to kind of calm that feeling down with something is what it is, right? I know for me sometimes, it'll be ice cream or sugar, right? Or I will just sit and scroll Instagram mindlessly for an hour, right? And I know what I'm doing. I can fully acknowledge it, but I can't stop it because that's all I can do in that moment. And for me now, I can kind of rationalize it and say I'm not drinking, right? Like I'm not doing that thing that's really bad for me. But I know I could be doing better, right? But at least being able to acknowledge it is important. And And then the other thing that you brought up was this comparison idea,
Mhm.
and I know there's like an AA thing about comparison, and I'm not really well versed in the AA language, but it's awful. It just steals everything, right? Because you could be doing something so amazing in the world, but you're looking like around the corner at somebody else and thinking, well, they're just doing it that much better.
Yeah.
And I know some people have said this on other podcasts, and I've heard about it, and I don't know what the actual social phenomenon is, but now even more so, we compare ourselves because of social media to this larger group of people that we never would have known existed, right? Like you used to have a very finite amount of people that you could compare yourself to. Of course, there was television and there was like lifestyles of the rich and the famous and actors and
Hmm.
actresses, but like I think our brains can absorb that to some extent, but then when you just see like a normal person or who you assume is a normal person like sitting on a private jet, right? And you're struggling to go on vacation in your car. Your brain does
Hmm.
something very weird, and you're doing it in relation to your modeling, but people do it all the time, and it just is, it like destroys you, right? Like you see
Big
the
time.
person you went to high school with, and they're like, they're on a cruise around the world for the next 6 weeks, and you're like, man, I'm just at work. Like, what did I do wrong? Um,
Yeah.
Mind-bogglingly bad for us, I think. And then
It's so
obviously,
true.
yeah,
And it's so prevalent with, like you said, with social media. Like it's so prevalent. Like I click on social media and I'm in my 40s and I'll see a 21-year-old driving a Ferrari and I'm like, why don't I have a Ferrari?
right,
Like,
right,
wait, what? Why don't I like? Why am I custom ordering a Rolls Royce and they made $30 million last year? It's like, well, wait a second. And you said it so perfectly, and I hadn't even thought about that like before, that we had such a small, like we were exposed to such a small group of people before, and I loved having in that time where it was much more innocent and much more disconnected. Um, Obviously, there are the benefits of now and stuff like that, but yeah, you're right. It's comparison. It's a hard thing to do as an adult. I can't imagine kids growing up in this. Like it's nuts.
yeah. Like they can't even. That's all they know, right? And again, there were outliers when I was growing up. Like there was somebody who
Yeah.
had the big house, and there was the kids that had the fancy car and all that stuff. But it was
Hmm.
in some way I could kind of wrap my head around that. And now it's just so in your face, and there's this idealized version that you see of everything, and it's not true. And I just I also want my listeners to know that, because there's like all these versions of
Yes.
like, you know, hey, I'm in recovery and I get to lift weights and I do crafting, and it's like, okay, but you don't know the other side of that story. Like you can't compare yourself to that person because you don't know what that person's like. They might have a very easy way about it. Like maybe they're independently wealthy and all
Yeah.
they have to do is focus on crafting and, hiking in the mountains and they don't have to work.
Hmm.
And that makes their recovery story much different than maybe somebody who's like barely able to pay their rent. And I think it becomes increasingly hard the more you dive into that world of online. And I struggle with it because I love the internet. I love Spotify. I love, the access to information when I want it, but there's this bad side to it too, right?
Totally.
And then the other thing that you said in that story, which, thank you for sharing, is that experience in Miami. Like that is just not acceptable. And to your
Yeah.
point, like it wasn't when it happened, you're there, tons of shame and you're angry and scared and you don't know what to do with it and you feel like it could affect your livelihood. And there wasn't an outlet at that point. And I think, I'm trying to think, there was a pitcher for the New York Mets that shared a story. Um, now I think you're hearing more men come out with stories. Like I know Dak Shepard has shared on his podcast that like like he's had some issues, I believe, and or had an issue, where he was sexually assaulted, and But yeah, it's a hard one for I think men to share sometimes. So
Big time. I thought until about a year, maybe year and a half ago, I thought I would take the sexual assault and the eating disorder to my grave.
yeah,
I didn't tell when I finally did start to go to therapy 5 years earlier. I didn't tell my therapist even those things. I told her everything else and danced around. I did I got a lot out of it. Great work. Got a massive, but I still felt that shame and that I guess not really guilt. Whatever. I just didn't think I would talk about it. And the more that I've just come to forgive myself, and that's a big thing I always talk about is like, so I forgive myself for the decisions that I made and the addiction, the alcoholism and the drug addiction and stuff like that, which you haven't even got to the drug addiction. But I forgive myself for making those mistakes because you know what? I was trying. I was lost.
mm-hmm.
I had lost my I didn't, but I was trying with the best that I had. I was okay. I forgive myself. I can't get the time back. I can't get the money back. I wish I could because it's a lot of money, but I can't. And then I also forgive myself for the things that have happened to me that are out of my control, like my mom passing away or like the sexual assault. Like, they're awful things that are out of my control, but they're part of my story and part of the whole thing is what's made me who I am.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't take anything back because I've become very proud of the person that I am, and trying to work hard to be a better person every day and learn. I love having conversations like this, like with people like yourself, and learning from that. But it wasn't until, like I said, about a year, maybe a year and a half ago, that I actually truly realized that I forgave myself and could forgive myself, and then that I could talk about this and walk into the hockey locker. They'll play hockey 4 times a week, and the guys wouldn't look at me or go to the gym, and it was the opposite. It looked at me differently in a good way. They're like, "Wow, like good for you, man. Like, thanks. Like, we need you to hear that." I'm like, it's just some regular dude trying to figure out life, but I appreciate it because for years I was just ashamed and afraid of all the things that people would think about me.
Right. But when you carry all that around, I think people can see it too, like on you. Like you carry yourself differently in the world, right? Like it's like your face is a little bit different, your body language is different, maybe you're a little bit guarded. And then when you really, really open up, I think that like the world can feel it. So, there's probably something in there as you kind of let that out. Like, yeah, everybody around you is feeling that openness now.
Big time.
Yeah.
It's a physical weight lifted,
Right.
because you're not, it's you're not hiding that part of yourself. I'm a very private person, and there are certain things that have happened with like in my family and stuff like that is just for me.
Yeah.
And I will keep that for myself. But these other things, that they are things that I can talk about, and every time selfishly, like the main reason I do this is because it continues to help me grow and to help go forward. And then next is if it can help somebody else, like, dude, that's the best thing ever.
Yeah.
Like, to help somebody else when I've been there and felt like, oh, I'm gonna make it out of this, or I'm never gonna be any kind of normal, whatever that is.
Mhm.
Or I resigned myself, so I'm gonna be an alcoholic for the rest of my life, I'm a drug addict for the rest of my life, I'm gonna be and then just trying to be a good person. It's it's an important thing to do, but
the disordered eating one for men too is another big one. I've
I
had
think it's bigger than we know.
Yeah, and I've had two women on that have had food challenges. One was a recovering food addict, and she had, had talked about her journey with food, and then another woman, I think, was a little less open about it, but kind of mentioned it, right? Like it was part of her story, but not really like this giant part. And but with men, I don't know that it's like it's definitely not at the forefront of the conversation of issues around men's health. But again, I think it's probably bigger than we know, and the more that people like yourself share it, I think it can come to the front. Like specifically, I'm guessing in the fitness world, it's probably a big deal.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, right. Like because you're just seeing that this guy is he's working out and he's having these results and I'm doing the same thing and I'm not getting the results. And like, how do
Yeah.
you get there? And if I don't want to use steroids, well, my only choice is really food and lack of food, right? Like it's a very
Yeah.
sort of clear path in that person's head at that point, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think also goes back to even there is in the fitness world and the modeling world. But it is in the world in general because, these kids and people flip open their Instagram and, there's some guy who's got from his chin down to his butt. Like,
Right.
what? Like,
Yeah.
well, that's what I'm comparing myself with. Like, and yeah, there's so much more of that. And I I think it's something that men need to talk about more and we need to address more because I think it's just as prevalent. The same expectations, I guess, are being put on men
Mm-hmm.
as well as women, and yeah, with that comes the dark side of it.
Right.
People. We also live in this instant gratification society where it's like I could either work out and eat properly for 2.5 years and see some results, or I can go behind the gym and get the vial of this from this guy and not eat this and then, get the results faster. So
Yeah.
I get it. I sympathize with everybody. And I think people can do what they want with their bodies. But I think it's something that's much more prevalent than we know.
Yeah. I mean, I could say for myself, like I just started going back to the gym in February. My older son was like, "It's time to go back. You haven't been doing anything," and I was talking about this with my family because I went on SSRIs in 2021. I had just like a series of events and like life just became overwhelming. And the thought was like, okay, I can either really fall apart or I can go on drugs. So I chose drugs and they worked. And then like instantaneously they put on 20 pounds. So I went from like
Mm-hmm.
this manageable weight for me that I was able to move around and feel good in. And then it put on 20 pounds. And then I went off SSRIs. And the 20 pounds is hung around, like just has, like it's never gone away. And it's hard now going back to the gym. Like all the things that used to be easy, like running, really hard, pull-ups, really hard. Like it's almost like I'm wearing a weight vest. And I was trying to explain it to my older son, like because he'll wear a weight vest. He's 18 and he's like he's in good shape. So he's like, come on, and it's like. Yeah, but it feels like I'm wearing that weight vest all the time, like, in comparison to where I was. And so it's just like, but it's like little bits, I know I'm not going to change my body in 2 months. It's a year, 2 years to your point. But for me, it's less about what I look like and more how I feel. I'm obviously not a young person who's like, I'm not trying to impress anybody. And I don't know that that's the purpose of fitness anyway. Like the purpose of fitness is to like be able to live a good life and, carry your groceries in and all those things, right? Like lift your kid up, like just basic stuff.
Yeah.
So
As a model and like the outside is a byproduct of why I practice healthy lifestyle.
right.
I'm doing it because I almost lost it from the inside with pancreatitis.
Yeah.
I want to take care of the inside and then do things what's right, and then the outside's a byproduct.
Yeah.
Like I model and play hockey and stuff like that, but it's inside out, and I'm never going to like cut corners or compromise anything for the outside that will compromise the inside. And especially in my head, because the side effects of those things that people can put in their bodies are, compromised mental health. And I've spent way too long getting to and it's a daily thing up there anyway. So there's no way I'm putting near me that could I don't drink caffeine anymore.
Okay.
I'm so yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. It's from the inside out, and it's that carrying your groceries all in one go and taking 2 trips.
Yeah, it's just like the little things, right? And I know that it's silly, but even today, like I had a rough day at work, and then I've been using the gym to kind of just go, and I get exhausted and I don't care about the work day, right? Like whatever happened just kind of like melts away. So it's also good for my brain. And it's an important thing. So, the work that you're doing for people as a personal trainer, like kind of transcends the physical part. I think you're doing a lot more in that world than just like changing the way they look. And I hope most people and I'm sure that you're, expressing that to your clientele.
Very much so. And people put their guard up, especially personal trainer. Hey, I'm Jonathan. I'm your model personal trainer, and they're like, oh, but then I'm like, hey, this is what I used to look like.
Yeah.
And that helps people lower their guards. And okay, we're not here to modeling is just a job. Who cares? And I'm here just to help you learn more about your body. And my goal has always been with my clients and with fitness is I want to pass on my knowledge to then make myself obsolete to the point where they are on their own. Like I want to just sit there with a clipboard and just count their reps every time. Like I want to help you understand the whys and understand this so you can go and leave the nest and go and now you know why and go ahead. So
Right. Yeah,
that's just my philosophy on it.
No, that's important. I think that's with any kind of coach, right? That's the goal. Like you don't want to be there forever, right? Like the idea is that you coach, they go do the thing, and they can do it on their own.
Yes.
Period.
Exactly.
Stop. Right? Like that's it. Well, I know. This has been really good conversation, and there's you're super interesting guy with an interesting story for sure. But I do like to shift towards the end to talk a little bit about like what you do for fun. I know that this is totally unrelated to what we just talked about, but I am a big fan of media, like TV, books, podcasts, movies, whatever it is. And I just like to kind of pick my guests' brains about things that are interesting you right now in that world. Is there anything?
Yeah, so in the last probably year and a half, I've really gotten into Korean television.
Okay.
And Korean dramas and stuff like that. I also started watching anime and stuff. For the longest time, I was like, it's cartoons for nerds. But I started watching it, and it's really incredible storyline, stuff like that. I was watching so much true crime for a long time. And it was just I'd wake up and it'd be murder, and I'd go to bed and it'd be murder, and I'd be like, this is getting into my. I was like, I need to shift, and I remember I watched. I would never watch Hallmark. I mean, I've been on the cover of over 150 Harlequin romance novels, but I've never read them, and I would never watch a Hallmark thing. I was watching some Korean romantic drama, and I remember I was just feeling nice when I went to bed. I was like, oh, that was kind of sweet and stuff. So, and I've always been very curious about and interested in going to visit Japan and Korea and more about the culture and stuff. So, it's been something I've always loved. British television, British culture. Mm-hmm. I've always had a very big thing. Snatch by Guy Ritchie is probably, if you ask me, I had to pick a favorite movie, I'd say it'd be Snatch with Jason Statham, and it's such a great movie. But and then otherwise, I've broadened my horizons a lot with regards to that, because I was always very set in my ways. I was like, I'll watch a comedy or whatever. I was like, sci-fi is for nerds, but I very much have gotten out of that, so such and such is for such and such.
Yeah.
I'm much more, open to, I like watching documentaries, really just, finding something that I can just zone out and disconnect for a while, or something that I can learn. And I really enjoy reading as well, and playing hockey is a big hobby of mine.
Okay.
Being active and finding something besides going to the gym all the time where I can still do something I love. I've been doing since I was 6 years old, and around teammates and the competitive aspect, but the fun, and gets me out of my house because I'm a very big homebody.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, those are kind of some of the things that I do for fun. I got a little dog here, my little, well, she's about medium sized, but my dog Bailey, she's a wonderful 10-year-old Beagle Bulldogs.
Okay.
She's a big part of my life as well. So, yeah.
I wouldn't have pegged Korean TV, but that's super interesting.
Yeah.
And I think it was on my last episode. I was talking about the true crime thing because I myself went through a period of just like true crime podcasts, and it does sort of just take over every bit of your brain, and it's just murder and kidnapping, and it just
Yeah.
really can bring you down to like a very dark place. And I have not partaken much in recent, like in the last 2 years, probably. I've kind of stepped away from it.
Yeah. I'm the exact same. I'm like on the same. I moved to Texas and I had like this true, I'm like, yes, this is perfect. And then that's when I realized like, oh, I need to distance myself from it, because it brings you down. You see families being crushed, and I don't know. We don't need to get
Yeah,
all
no, I
bummed
know what
out.
you're saying. So for me, I try to give something every week, and it's hard, but I do watch quite a bit of streaming on TV, and I had started a show on Amazon with my wife, and we turned it off because it was like a little too violent for her, and the subject matter was like a little bit off. It is a pretty off show, so I'm just gonna preface with like, this is not a show for everybody. Definitely not a show for kids, and if you're not into like really graphic violence, I would not suggest this show. But I enjoyed it, and there's a new season coming out, so it's called The Boys. I guess it was based on a comic book,
Yeah,
and
heard of that.
it's a very strange show. It's about superheroes, and it kind of like interweaves with American culture today. So it's kind of taking this like superhero comic book story and interweaving it with like American culture. Um, so interesting show.
Hmm.
And again, very violent. I would not recommend it for everybody. Like comic book violence, like
Yeah, yeah,
not
yeah,
real. But it is.
yeah.
There's some other heavy subject matter. So, um, but that's mine for the week. And Jonathan, if you wanted to leave the listeners like with one last thought about how they can maybe, you know, help their recovery, or if they're struggling, like what would be your advice to somebody who's just in that place of like, I don't know what to do next? Like, what would you be saying to somebody?
Talk to somebody. That's the biggest thing. I suffered in silence, and I was very insular with all my addictions and stuff like that. Like, it wasn't like, hey, let's get together and get high and stuff like that. It was like I would just withdraw myself from, and just suffer in silence, and then on my mask, and I'd go out and think everything's okay. But it wasn't until I actually started talking to somebody. I went to a mental health professional, started talking to my close friends and letting them in on what was going on, and that was when I could really start to turn the page. I think it's a really important thing to do, to talk about it and understand that it'll help you understand that you're not the only person who's ever felt this way when that's how you feel. I'm the only person. And, you go out, and I'm I was raised to, have good manners and do all that kind of stuff. And go and there, you're a loser. Like you're failing at life. You're a failure. And it really helped shift that. I would say, yeah, talk to people. Just start talking about it. and yeah, you'll notice that it'll
Great.
just go from there.
Great. Well, thank you very much for being on the show, Jonathan. It was great getting to know you and hearing your story. For the listeners, if you could do all the liking and subscribing and commenting, it helps bring people to the show. And really, that's the only goal here, is to get more ears and people to hear these stories and maybe find their own pathway to just a not even recovery, but just a better way of living. I try to talk to all different walks of life, and it's been really interesting tonight. So thank you again, Jonathan, and we will see everybody here next week.